Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the world of cowboy stories, we ride the stories of the West. Campfire truths, trail dust. Memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The sun pressed down like a hand. Heat lifted off the road in slow shivers, and the air tasted of chalk. May Whitlow came in on foot skirt, hem scuffed white toes, split and raw. The sign for Ash Bluff leaned at an angle. Paint had flaked to gray bone. Beyond it, a single street boards cupping windows clouded with dust, a few doors propped open with stones. A tumble of bottles behind the copper lantern's dark panes. A mercantile, a livery that smelled of ammonia and old hay. A small storefront with gold lettering rubbed thin Klein's watch and radio repair. A wind lifted. It did not cool. It sifted grit across May's ankles and stung the cracked places. She held one thing close, a faded velvet pouch knotted tight and looped twice around her fingers. She could feel the circle inside when she walked. It hit against bone. She climbed the step to Klein's. Inside was dim. The glass door clicked shut, and a brass bell sang a thin note that died quick. Air hung heavy with oil and hot metal, a bitter edge like pennies. On a shelf, a Philco radio glowed a sleepy orange. A man's voice seeped through static. Advisory for a belt of high winds. Visibility poor. Seek shelter if possible. Mr. Klein sat behind a case lined with tarnished watches and busted pocket knives. His shoulders sloped under a vest whose buttons strained. A loop filled his right eye. Both hands were steady on a delicate gear. He did not look up. May touched the counter with 4 fingers to be sure she could still feel. She swallowed and found the motion scraped her throat. She did not speak. Klein set the gear down. He turned his head and unscrewed the loop. His eye blinked pink from pressure. He looked at her face, then at her bare feet, then at the velvet pouch. His mouth moved but did not soften. "You are not here for a tune-up." May placed the pouch on the glass. The knot had dried like rock. She worked it until it gave. Her hands trembled. She tipped the pouch. A narrow gold band slid out and clicked against the glass top of the case. Its edges were thin where time had worn it smooth. It was not ornate. It did not need to be. Klein hooked it with a fingernail and brought it under a lamp. He held it to the light and rolled it. He found the dull places where it had kissed another ring for years. He set it on a small brass scale. The weights chimed a tiny sound swallowed by the room. He lifted a dark stone, scratched the band, and dripped 2 pinheads of acid. The scratch turned to honest color. He said nothing. He wiped the stone with a rag and put it away. He slid the ring back, not to her, but to the edge of the scale. May's fingers curled on themselves. She kept them off the glass. The skin on her knuckles was split in fans that looked like frost spread in reverse. Klein took a book from a drawer. He licked a finger and turned a page. "Store credit," he said. 5, not cash. Her throat closed. Her body thought of bread. The smell of it from when bread used to live in her house. She nodded once. A yes that barely had sound. "That is fine." Klein's pen scratched across the paper. The radio chewed static. The bell over the door rang again. Nobody in the shop moved for a heartbeat. Klein's pen hung in the air. May looked down at her toes because she could not bear to look anywhere else. Dust had settled along the ridges like powder along old seams. A shape filled the doorway. Tall hat brim pulled low coat the color of old canvas stained with road dust. He shut the door with the back of his wrist. His boots were quiet on the floor. His jaw had a line to it that did not go away when he relaxed. He did not feel like town. He felt like what waited beyond town. "It is worth 10, he said. His voice was even not loud, a statement that did not ask for what anyone thought. Klein looked up like a turtle. His eyes flicked from the hat to the mouth to the hands. He found no tremor. He found a man who had walked a long way with his own questions. "Sir, this is private business." The man stepped forward until the lamp made his eyes pale. They were a hard kind of gray. He reached into his coat and took out 2 bills. He smoothed them flat on the glass with the side of his hand. 5 and 5, silver certificates without creases. May felt her ribs move in a way that hurt. She could hear her own breath because everything else had gone quiet. The radio muttered words about pressure and movement of storms over the plains. She did not understand most of it. Klein tapped the bills. He weighed them with 2 fingers. He watched the man's face and saw nothing shift. He palmed the bills and slipped them under the counter. He pinched the ring between thumb and forefinger, held it above the wood for 1 second, and let it drop to the counter. It made a sound deeper than its size. "Sold," he said. May could feel every place on her skin where the wind had burned it raw. She could feel the grit on her tongue. She could feel the heat at the back of her neck. She could not feel her feet. Shame rose all the same. It climbed behind her eyes until her head felt full. The man did not look at Klein again. He looked at the ring in his palm. It sat in the crease like a coin that meant too much to spend. He turned to May. She moved back. Her hand went to her throat. She shook her head. She did not have words that made sense. She did not want to beg, and she did not know how to accept. He crossed the space slow where she could see him coming. He stopped at an honest distance. He held his left hand up empty. "May I?" he said. May did not trust the word yes any longer. Her body said nothing. Her hand was at her side. He did not wait for long. He reached out not rough and took her left hand where it hung. His palm was warm. The pads of his fingers were hard from tools or reins or a gun. The grip was sure not tight. He slid the ring onto the finger it used to know. It moved over dry skin and settled. The metal felt cold for a moment. It warmed fast. May pulled. Her fingers were swollen at the joints. The ring held. Her breath turned sharp. "Are you laughing at me?" she said. The words came out thin and scraped. "Is this a joke? Buy it just to hand it back. Make a show of it. Take a look, everybody, at how low a woman can go." He did not move. He did not flinch at the words like a man who wanted to be clean of them. His face did not hold pity. It did not hold pleasure either. "You should not have to sell your past to eat," he said. "That is all." May hit his chest with one fist. It was a soft hit. It landed like a folded towel. Her arm had no weight left in it. She hit him again so that it would feel like she had done something. It felt like pressing against a wall. He stayed still. He let her spend what she had. When her arm dropped, when the shaking in her hand made it useless, she looked up at the lamp and then at the doorway, because the door was a way out. Her vision pinched down for a second. The air in the room thinned until it felt like the whole shop was inside a jar. The man saw it come for her. He stepped forward and caught her under the arms as her knees folded. His hands were fast under a coat that did not look fast. May did not fall. Her head tipped against his shoulder. She could smell sun and dust and wool that had been rained on once and dried by wind. Klein scraped his chair back and fussed with a tin cup. He poured from a crock. He set the cup on the counter within reach, then pushed it closer with 2 fingers like it might bite. "Jonah," he said, because the name had been in his mouth once upon a time. "You are not carrying her out in that sun without water." The man flicked his eyes toward the cup. He nodded once. He held her with one arm, reached for the cup, and brought it to her mouth. "A little," he said. His voice shaped the words in a way that made them easy to do. May drank. The water tasted like a pipe and stone. It slid down like cool light. Her eyes rolled once, paled, then found his face. She saw the line of his jaw. She saw 3 small white lines along his knuckles that looked like old cuts. She saw a thread looped along the inside of his collar where someone had mended a tear. She saw steadiness. She saw nothing else. "What is your name?" she asked. The words were small in the warm room. She did not know why she wanted to know. "Hale," he said. "Jonah Hale." May tried to say her own. It stuck. She looked down at the band in place, sunken between dry skin and bone, as if it had never left. Her body chose that moment to leave her again. Color folded out of her view. Sounds came from far away. The brass bell sounded when the door opened. Light hit like a blade. Jonah shifted his grip, one arm under her knees, the other behind her shoulders. He lifted as if she were a child, asleep in a chair. The heat in the doorway blew in his face. May's head fell against his chest. The ring on her hand flashed once in the bright. He took one step over the threshold and into the white of the day. Behind him, the Philco kept talking to nobody in particular about wind that moved like walls and towns that learned to shut their doors. Heat swallowed him as he stepped into the street. Jonah shifted May in his arms and crossed to the strip of shade that clung to the livery wall. The smell hit first. Ammonia horse. The old sweetness of hay gone sour. A stable hand looked up and then looked away the way men do when something looks like trouble and mercy in the same shape. Inside the tack room, it was dim and close. Ropes hung from nails and curls. A wall clock ticked with a tired click. Jonah set May on a folded blanket near a stack of grain sacks. Her head rolled, found his sleeve, and stilled. He took the tin cup from his coat pocket, the same cup Klein had shoved along the counter. He filled it from a barrel whose water tasted like wood. He touched the rim to May's mouth. "Drink," he said. Small sips. She swallowed with effort. The water seemed to find its own way. Her eyes cleared to a wet brightness. She looked at him like, you look at something you cannot put a name to. Her voice came out like paper rubbed thin. How much do I owe you? Price is this, Jonah said. You drink, you eat, you stand up again. Then you walk any direction you like. Nobody does anything for nothing. I am not nobody. A gust hit the doors. Dust snuck through gaps and made threads in the air. The horses shifted and blew through their noses. From the main street, a radio voice wavered and broke against the noise. Advisory, high winds, seek shelter. The sound thinned to a hum and then to static. Jonah unrolled a small canvas bundle from his saddlebag, a dented tin and a spoon. He had traded for stew in the saloon kitchen when he had water in his own throat and could not swallow it. He set the tin in a nest of coals the hand kept smoldering in a shallow box for coffee. The smell rose slow. Thin beef salt, a hint of onion. He stirred, blew once across the top, and held it out. May pulled herself up to sitting. The blanket rasped under her palms. She took the tin with both hands so she would not spill. She tried to eat neat. 2 bites held back. The third clawed out of her like a reflex. She stopped herself and looked at him, ashamed of the hunger he had already seen. He nodded toward the spoon. Go on. When she finished, she ducked her head. Thank you, she said, and the thank you had the shape of something that had cost. The light in the doorway changed without changing color. It thickened. The sky had been a bleached sheet of tin before. Now it carried a bruise that ran from horizon to roofline. Men on the street raised their faces and then did not look again. The copper lantern door banged and then got latched with a bar. Jonah watched the edge of the day flatten. He tied a kerchief over his mouth and nose. He held another in his fist and spoke to May through the cloth. Wrap this, he said. Keep it against your face. She did. The fabric smelled of clean cotton and dust and a little smoke. I can walk, she said. Let me try. He let her stand. She swayed and caught the wall. He put his hand on her elbow, steady and impersonal, like a rail. The first breath of the storm came under the doors. Grit hit their ankles. The air sharpened. It felt like the moment just before a train arrives. Not here, he said. Roof will lift. Come on. They moved along the alley close to the buildings. Jonah kept his shoulder between May and the street. The wind rose in steps. First a pull at the skirt, then a slap of grit that made the eyes swell. Then the wall itself. It came running. The world went brown and then went black, the way a curtain goes when someone pulls it and forgets the cord in their hand. May's breath went ragged under the kerchief. The dust found her nose and tried the back of her throat. She tasted iron and earth. Jonah bent, hooked an arm under her knees again, and took her, like some men take sacks of seed to get them inside before a storm. He moved without hurry and without doubt. He counted in his head with each step. Fence post, 2 boards of a gate, the place where the alley narrows, the feel of a latch under the fingers. They came to a low door in a wall that looked like a storage lean-to. Jonah shouldered it. The wood gave. He got them in and pushed it shut. He dropped a thick bar into place. The bar answered with a soft wooden thud. It sounded like a deep yes. Darkness. He found the lamp by touch. A sulfur match scratched along the sole of his boot. The first flame went out. He struck another. The wick caught and lifted their faces into a thin amber that did not reach the corners. The room was small, hardly wider than a wagon. Old straw made drifts in both ends. A broken crate lay on its side like a dog asleep. The smell was old hay mouse and rain that had once gotten in and dried slow. The wind pushed through the seams and sang a high whine that set the teeth on edge. Jonah took his bedroll from the canvas bag and shook it out. He set it near the lee wall where the drafts were less. He unbuttoned his coat and draped it over May's shoulders before she could protest. Sit, he said. The word landed with weight and no sharpness. She sat. Her fingers worked the edge of the coat like a rosary. She stared at the door. The bar held. The door rattled and then held again. Jonah poured a little more water. He made her drink between coughs. He took a strip of dried meat from his bundle and set it in her palm. Eat, he said. Slow. You can hate it later. She did as she was told, and it did not feel like being told. She chewed in small, rhythmical bites while the storm found new ways to pull at the walls. When she looked up, her eyes had less glass in them. She tugged the kerchief down. What do you want from me? She said. The voice was stronger for being quiet. Nothing, Jonah said. Nobody wants nothing. I want you warm. That is what I want. She uncurled her hand and placed the strip of meat that was left on the bedroll between them. It lay there like a marker. She tucked the coat close and drew her knees up. The ring caught the lamp and threw a stitch of light on the boards. She stared at it as if it were something that did not belong to her skin. The wind changed pitch. A pop from the roof made both of them look up. Jonah stood and pressed a flat palm to the warped boards. He nodded to himself at what he felt there. He brought the lamp lower and checked the seams for chaff coming through. He pushed his hat back and rolled his shoulders once, like a man who has carried a weight a long time, and set it down for a minute. "You should sleep," he said. "It is loud. Loud will not hurt you." He lay down on the far side of the bedroll with the coat still around May. He waited long enough for the waiting to mean something. Then he shifted closer until his chest warmed her back through the coat. His forearm settled over her middle, heavy, in a way that said protection and nothing else. "If this is not all right, say so." Her spine was stiff for a count of 10. The stiffness eased. The coat trapped the warm air. The shivering fell away from the outer muscles and then from the ones that hide under bone. She let her head rest on her arm. He breathed out against her hair. It smelled like soap and alkali and the faint breath of grass from a place where grass still grows. Her voice came so small he almost missed it. "I do not know how to take this. Kindness. You do not have to take it. It is already here." She closed her eyes. The storm pressed, keened, and then steadied into a long, hard moan that did not care who heard. Jonah stayed awake. He watched the lamp burn a thumb high and then shorter. He checked the latch twice with his fingertips and felt the vibration of the wind in the wood. He thought of Klein's radio and the way a voice can try to get across a distance and lose itself in the noise. He thought of the door and the bar and the useful truth of simple things that do the thing they were made to do. May's breathing found a slow count. A piece of straw near her cheek quivered when she exhaled. The ring on her finger clicked once, a tiny metal sound against the tin spoon on the floor beside the bedroll. Jonah eased the coat higher over her shoulder and let his eyes close for the first time since the light had been white. The room held the two bodies and the small heat they made. Outside, the world scraped along itself and tried to unmake the edge of the town. Morning came like a blade polished clean. The roar had fallen to a deep hum that lived in the boards and the breath. When Jonah slid the bar up, the little door pushed back against his shoulder as if the storm still had a hand on it. Then it let go. Outside, the street lay under a sift of ash, fine as flour. The sky was a hard blue with a white seam along the horizon where the dust still wandered off. May sat up slow. The coat slid from her shoulders and pooled at her waist. Her hair had turned the color of the town gray with streaks that made her look older than she was. She set the kerchief aside and pressed both palms on the worn plank floor to ground herself. When she stood, her knees said no, and then yes. "We are not staying here," Jonah said. He did not ask if she could walk. He took stock the way men do with animals and fences and weather. He handed her the coat again. "Keep it." They moved along the edge of buildings, keeping to what shade the walls could spare. The wind had gone to a steady push that felt like thought. Jonah signaled with his chin, and they stepped off the street and out past the last shack, where the land opened into low country. Dry grass made a pale nap across the ground, like fur brushed the wrong way. Far ahead, a small tower spun slow. The vanes creaked around. A line of shade slid over a squat roof. A thin string of smoke showed itself and vanished. "The windmill," May said, and her voice had no weight. She wanted to say something else and could not find a word that felt safe. Jonah nodded once. He did not hurry. He let her set the pace. His long steps shortened. He walked as if he had done this many times, as if he had walked people out of bad places to a better door. The Hale place sat in a fold of rock where the wash bent. It was not much. A square room with a stone chimney, a lean-to that had started life as a good idea and then met wind. A corral built of poles bleached the color of old paper. The door had a thick board for a bar, and iron strap hinges black with age. The yard was swept bare by the gale. A metal tub leaned against the wall. The windmill clacked and sent thin water to a round tank that sweated on its sides. Jonah lifted the latch and pushed the door with his hand flat. He let May step in first. The room smelled like cold soot and wood that had traveled a long way to get here. Light came through a single pane with a crack that ran corner to corner and made a small V where a brittle piece had fallen out. A table sat under it with a cup ring worn into the wood. A cot stood along the far wall. A hook over the hearth held a blackened pot. A dry sink with a bucket and a ladle waited by the door. Everything had a place because there was not enough to get out of place. Jonah crossed to the fireplace and nudged the embers. A coal lived under ash. He fed it a twist of paper and 2 small sticks, then 2 larger ones. The room took on a thin warmth. He filled the pot with water from the bucket and set it on the iron trivet. He pointed with his chin toward a folded bundle on a shelf. Soap, towels, water is clean. May set the coat over the back of a chair and went to the sink. She rolled her sleeves cupped water and let it run through her fingers before she put any to her face. The first touch stung. Dust turned to paste and ran in ropes. She washed again and again, slow and careful, until the water in the basin went gray. She scrubbed her hands with the ash-colored soap. The grit in her knuckles lifted. When she was done, the skin felt new and too thin. She looked at her reflection in the small circle of tin that hung on a nail. The woman there had sharp edges and eyes that knew too much for mourning. The ring sat where he had placed it. Clean skin made the gold stand out. She turned her hand and watched the light in the metal. She placed her hand flat on the table for a moment. The wood felt warm where a shaft of sun had found it. Jonah set 2 cups on the table. He poured coffee so dark it looked like creek water after rain. It smelled like burnt chocolate and smoke. He sat and pushed 1 cup toward her with a finger on the rim. She took it and kept both hands around it as if it might walk away. Steam kissed her lips and found the sore places at the corners. She closed her eyes and breathed it. "That is good," she said. He nodded. There was a box on a shelf with a handful of cornmeal in a cloth bag. He set a small skillet on the heat, wiped it with bacon fat from a jar, and looked at her, as if to ask if she knew the rest. She knew. She measured with her hand salt on fingertip. A little water stirred with a wooden spoon that had once been long and was now short and ended in a taper where use had eaten it. The batter sizzled when it hit the pan. The smell was clean and made of 4 things that all used to live nearby. They ate without hurry. The bread was coarse. She split her portion with the knife and watched the steam go. She did not reach for more than she needed. He took his time with the coffee, then poured a little more for each of them. He watched her move. She watched how he watched, not with greed or pity, but with the inventory of a man who has to build life from small parts. The window ticked as a gust flexed the pane. The crack squeaked a little where the glass met itself. May set the cup down and stood. She went to the window and traced the line of the crack with a dry fingertip. She looked over her shoulder. "I can sew a curtain from a feed sack," she said. "For now. The light hurts." He held her gaze. He did not stop her. The corner of his mouth lifted by the ghost of a yes. He stood and crossed to a shelf by the door. He set a short bar of wood in the brackets fixed there. He tapped the end to show the fit. "At night this stays," he said. He waited until she looked at the bar. His voice did not rise. It did not leave room for argument, and yet it did not trample anything. She nodded, then went to the door and lifted the bar and set it back down to feel how it caught. She found a broom in the corner. The straw was soft with years, but it still worked. She swept the floor in long pulls, sending a line of dust toward the hearth. The work steadied her breath. She shook the blankets outside and watched the dirt go up and not come back down because the wind took it. She beat the mattress with the flat of her hand until her palms stung. She folded the corner and let air in. She wiped the table with a rag and a little soap, and watched the wood darken and then lighten as it dried. Jonah watched and did not say stop. He moved through the room with tools he had and a silence that lived in his lungs. He took a length of wire from a peg and fixed a loose hinge. He added 2 splits of wood and banked the coals for later. He set a tin of salt back from the edge and turned it so that the worn side was to the wall, and there was a care in the gesture that did not look like fear. May tested the chair with her hands before she sat, because chairs had failed her in the past. This one held. She looked at him across the small distance that a table makes in a room where 2 people do not yet know how to sit. "Thank you," she said, and it was a plain thank you with no bow on it. Jonah rested his forearms on his knees. He looked at her hands and then at her face. "Stay as long as you need," he said. His eyes moved to the door bar and back. "At night, keep it on. If you want the bed, take it. I can sleep by the fire." "I can sleep by the fire," May said. "You can." He did not argue. He reached for the pot and topped both cups. The coffee was weaker now. It still tasted like something that had been earned. Afternoon settled. Light moved across the plank floor and up the far wall. The windmill kept its slow speech. Somewhere in the dry wash, a cricket made a noise like a needle pulling thread. May watched the crack in the glass. Jonah mended the binding along a strap with thick twine and a blunt needle. The room held them without crowding. The bar on the brackets waited for dark. The ring on May's hand found the sun and gave it back in a line that ran across the wood to the far corner and disappeared. Light slid off the window like water and pooled on the table. The windmill clicked a slow count. May stripped a feed sack, cut it with a kitchen knife, and stitched a curtain by hand. The needle was blunt, and the thread was old, but her fingers found a rhythm. She hung the sack across the cracked pane, and the room softened. The light turned from blade to cloth. She washed the skillet, set it to dry on the hearth rock, and wiped the table once more for the pleasure of a clean palm. Her eyes went to the short bureau beside the cot. One drawer sat crooked. It had been shoved too many times. She knelt and nudged it. The drawer stuck halfway and complained in a thin wooden voice. She wiggled it and pulled. It came free so sudden it kissed her knuckles. Behind the empty slot was a shadowed gap where dust had settled thick. At the back of that gap, a corner of metal winked. She reached in and touched cold tin. She curled her fingers and slid out a flat box, the kind men use when they move from place to place and pretend they have a plan. It was not locked. She sat on her heels and worked the lid. Inside lay a silver badge, no shine left to it. U.S. Deputy Marshal stamped hard enough to last a lifetime. Next to it, a stack of papers. The top one was a wanted circular printed in muddy ink. A face looked out with eyes that did not care about eyes looking back. The charge read murder by hands on a woman's throat. Another poster for a man who had whipped his wife with a harness and left her in a barn. Another for a husband who had vanished with cash and children, and no one knew where the children were now. May's mouth went dry. The room seemed smaller, as if the air had pushed in to see. She turned one page and then another. Last was a letter in a careful hand. The paper had seen water that had dried and left a tide mark. "Dear brother," it began. There was a line about a ribbon. Another about a quiet, a heavy kind. The door latch clicked. May flinched and snapped the lid. She tucked the box to her chest the way a person holds a book they should not be reading. Jonah stood just inside the door with a bucket in his hand and a ring of water on his jeans where the bucket had knocked his leg. He looked at the box, then at her face. He set the bucket on the floor and took off his hat. "You found it," he said. There was no surprise in the words. There was something else, a tiredness that had a source. May placed the tin on the table and flipped the lid back open. She did not touch what was inside again. Her hand did not want to shake where he could see. The badge watched her. She watched it back. "You wore this," she said. "I did. For how long? Long enough." He pulled out the chair and sat. He set his palms on the table as if it would steady something in him. He looked at the badge, not at her. He was silent long enough for the windmill to mark 6 turns. The quiet filled the room like a third person. "Her name was Lark," he said. "My sister. She was quick and bright. She liked yellow. She married a man who smiled fast and sold things out of a case. I was on a drive. Cattle. Texas to Kansas. Letters came at first, then they came different. The words were small and kept on breaking. She wrote that she fell a lot, that she was clumsy." May's hand went to the side of her head without her thinking it. Her fingers found the tender patch that never grew all the way right. "I got home late," Jonah said. 6 months late. The neighbors told me. They said she was gone. They said the law was not for that. They said it was a family matter." He looked at the badge and spoke to it. "So, I got a badge. I made it my matter." May swallowed. The room had gone quiet except for the kettle tapping. She nudged the pot off the trivet so it would not boil away. She set 2 cups and poured coffee without asking if he wanted it. She slid one toward him. He did not reach for it yet. "I found him in Leadville," Jonah said. "In a back room. He was telling a story like it was a good one. I stopped the story. After that I kept going. Some men need to be found even when no one is looking for them." He touched the rim of the cup but did not drink. "That is the kind of work you cannot do for wage alone. You do it because you cannot put it down." May watched the papers. She did not read the names. She did not need names. She knew the shape of such men in any light. She turned her wrist and pushed her sleeve back. The thin white scar at her temple peered out from under hair. The light made it bright. He did not flinch at the sight. He did not stare either. She spoke without looking up. "His name was Roy," she said. The word was flat. "He taught me what a woman is for. He said a woman is storage. He said I was his. He liked me quiet. He liked me scared. Twice I lost a baby. The ground was like iron. The first time he said it was my fault. The second time he did not say anything at all. He just left it to me to put the world back the way it had been." The kettle ticked. The curtain moved a little in the draft and settled. "He left last winter," she said. "For wood," he said. "He took the good rifle and flour. He did not take me. I kept the ring. She put 2 fingers on the band. It was the only thing that told me I had not dreamed the years. Jonah closed his hand around the badge and then set it down again. He did not put it away. He let it sit between them like a witness. He lifted his cup and drank slow and steady as if the heat could build a wall inside him. He set the cup down with care so that it made no sound. "I am sorry," he said. She looked up. His eyes were plain. The sorry did not fix anything, and he did not pretend it could. She nodded once because the word had weight and had not been said to her in the right way before. He pushed the badge toward the box with 1 finger. He slid the box across the table so that it sat nearer to him than to her. He closed the lid. He did not force it. "You can look more if you want," he said, "or you can push it back where you found it. Whatever is easier to breathe with." May lifted her hand and let it fall back to the table. She did not want the papers in her hands. She wanted them to be real and not touch her. She nodded to the box. "Put it away, please." He stood and took the box to the bureau. He slid it into the dark and pushed the drawer home. It stuck and then gave the way. Stubborn things do when you know the trick of them. He turned back and found her watching his face. Her mouth opened and closed. Words failed at first. The one that came finally was the wrong one and the right one. "Why did you put it back?" she said. "The ring. Why did you make it mine again?" His jaw moved. He looked down at his hands. He spoke to the table. "Because the thing had a story, and none of it belonged in a pawn ledger. Because you did not look like someone who should go without bread because a man could not keep his vows. Because I could." May stood. The chair croaked across the floor. She took a step around the table and then stopped. The space between them was a small one, and also not small at all. She set her palm on the edge of the table to steady. She did not look at his mouth. She would not give it that power. She looked at his eyes. They were the gray of a cold morning that had already made up its mind. Her body leaned the smallest fraction. He did not meet her halfway. He did not rescue the moment. He stepped back instead, a full step that put the chair between them. He lifted one hand with the palm open. "Not a debt," he said. "Not ever. Not because I fed you. Not because of a box of paper. Not because I hurt when you say your husband's name. If you want something from me, you will say so in the clear, and I will say so back. That is the only way it lives." Her face pulled tight. Shame swelled up and then stalled there. She nodded once as if she were agreeing to terms for her own sake. Her throat worked. She put her hands flat on the table so he would not see them shake. She drew breath and let it out in a slow, rough line. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple. They were not small. He picked up the kettle and poured what was left into the pot to keep for later. He banked the fire and made the flame smaller. He moved in the room without haste. He took a small folded shirt from the shelf and set it at the foot of the cot for her to use as a pillow if she needed it. He set his own bedroll near the hearth. Outside, the windmill clicked once and then again. The feed sack curtain lifted and settled like someone breathing. The bar brackets on the door waited. The ring on May's hand found a line of late light that had slipped under the curtain and gave it back in a pale stripe on the wood. The stripe thinned. The room cooled. Jonah stood with one hand on the door frame and looked out at the shallow yard and the land that started the moment the yard ended. He watched until his eyes softened. Then he turned and met May's gaze. He gave a small nod that was not a bow and not a promise. She returned it. The room held the weight of what had been said, and nothing broke. By noon, the light had gone blunt again. The windmill kept turning in its slow grammar. Jonah lifted the lid from the flour tin and saw more bottom than meal. He set it back and reached for his coat. "I will go to town," he said. "Coffee salt." "Coffee salt flour." May looked up from the table where she had laid the needle and thread. The curtain she had made cut the glare. Her mouth tightened. "I can go," she said. He shook his head. "Stay and mind the door. If someone knocks, use the bar. Do not open for any voice. There is stew enough in the pot. Do you know where the pistol is?" "On the mantel," she said. The word had no tremor. He nodded once. He set the bar in the brackets and tested it. Then he lifted it and stepped through and set it back from the outside with a short piece of iron that slid into a loop. The wood caught with a sound like a latch inside a chest. He looked at her through the crack of the hinge. His eyes were level. She reached for the bar from her side and felt its weight and the way it sat true. He stepped away and the wind took the empty yard. Ash Bluff's main street carried a new smell. Under the dust and horse and soap, there was perfume gone sour and the old copper bite of whiskey. The copper lantern sign was fresh paint. The letters bled a little, and the lantern on the board had been done in real foil that flashed when the light cut it. Men who did not belong to the town leaned against the posts in front the way dogs lean into someone else's porch for shade they have not earned. Their hats were low, and their belts hung heavy with tools that speak only one language. Jonah tied his horse at Pender's Mercantile. Inside sacks of oats sat like squat gray men along the wall. A coffee grinder whispered as Mr. Pender turned the handle with long, careful fingers. He was tall and stretched thin by worry. Mr. Klein had taken a stool near the stove and held it like it might go somewhere without him. A drifter with a broom stood in the corner and watched as if the air were a show. "Afternoon," Pender said. His smile tried and failed. "Storm did not take your roof, I hear." "It took the land," Jonah said. He set a list on the counter. Coffee, salt, flour, 44 cartridges. Pender looked at the last line and then at Jonah's face. He dropped his eyes to the drawer and pulled it. He measured coffee with a tin scoop, and the room smelled like something clean and dark. He said, voice low, "You seen the new place across the way?" "I saw a sign. They came in the night the sky went purple. Not from here. Talk quick, tip bigware iron." He paused. "You hear a name says Cutter." The broom in the corner stopped. The drifter lifted his chin eyes bright. "I know that one," he said. "Roy Cutter. Mean as an oil slick. Holds court north. Likes to say every woman is his if he wants. Lost one ran on him. Says he is coming to take back what is his." Mr. Klein did not turn his head, but his eyes cut sideways. He spat into a paper and folded it. Pender kept his hands busy. He poured the salt into a small sack and tied it twice. Jonah's hand rested flat on the counter. It did not move. The skin across his knuckles whitened once, and then went the color of dust again. He said, "Give me the cartridges." He paid with exact bills and exact coins. Pender tried to give him a bit of string for free for the sacks. Jonah set a nickel on the wood without looking down and took the string all the same. Outside the copper lantern, a woman laughed with her mouth and not her eyes. A piano ran a scale and then quit. One of the men on the porch said "Marshal" without making it a question. Jonah did not look at him. He looped his reins and walked his horse back up the street, the way men walk after they have stood next to a grave they dug themselves. The yard at the Hale place lay the same as he had left it. His hinge trick let the bar loose. He stepped in and set it again. May stood by the table with her hand on the pistol. She put it down when she saw his face. He set the sack of flour and the coffee on the table, and the salt beside them. He did not take off his hat. "Say it," she said. Her voice had no shake, but her hand found the back of the chair. "Cutter outfit," Jonah said. "Name is Roy Cutter. He says he is coming. He says he wants his property." The word hung in the room like smoke. May's fingers pressed the wood so hard her nails went white. She swayed and caught herself before the chair went. Her face closed down without going empty. She lifted her chin because the body learns what it has to do to stay upright. "He will not come if I leave," she said. "He will follow me and not find you. You will be safe. Let me go now. I know the road south. I can take the wash." "No." Jonah's voice did not rise. It landed and stayed where it landed. He crossed to the door and set the bar in place with care. He turned and leaned his back to the wood. He did not come toward her because the room was small and she needed room. "You do not go back out there for him." May moved quick. She grabbed a sack and stuffed it with a shirt, a crust of bread, a folded feed sack. Her hands shook and made the bread tear into pieces. She did not see it go to crumbs. She looked for her shoes and could not find them, then remembered she did not have any shoes. "He will kill you," she said. "He is not like men with rules. He will wait for dark. He will bring others. He will not knock. He will burn us out." Jonah watched her move. He said, "You want me alive?" She stopped. He nodded a fraction. "Then do not open my door. Do not walk out into his line. Do not leave me a house with no one in it when I come back." "Come back from where?" He lifted his hat, then set it back on his head. He stepped to the peg and took the gun belt that had not seen daylight since he hung it there. He buckled it slow. The leather creaked. The weight sat at his hip like something that remembered his shape. "No," she said. "Do not go to him. Do not say our names in his place." He stepped close enough to take her face in his hands without touching it. He did not touch her. He let the space speak. "The bar stays," he said. "You keep the pistol in your coat pocket. If anyone breathes wrong on my door, you put them in the dirt. Do you hear?" Her throat worked. "I hear." He went to the door and lifted the bar. He slipped out and set his iron catch again so that the wood met wood and held. He was on the outside. She was on the inside. He could hear her breath through the crack, and she could hear his. He dropped his head just once until his hat brim touched the door. Then he turned and went to the horse. The copper lantern had put yellow light on the street, though the afternoon was still wide. Inside, the air was hot from bodies and lamps. A bartender with eyes like pennies looked up and said nothing. 3 men at a table had cards in their hands and nothing human in their faces. A girl leaned against the piano and watched the ceiling, as if music might appear there. Jonah pushed the door behind him until it hit wood. He stood where he could see the emptiness in the corners. He rested his hand on the butt of his pistol and let it stay there. He saw a face he had noticed in the street sitting by itself, narrow and bright, with the kind of quick that gets a man killed. "Which one of you talks for Roy Cutter?" he said. The narrow man lifted a shoulder. "I may carry a word now and then." "Carry this." Jonah's voice did not change shape. "You tell Roy Cutter that May Whitlow is on my land. You tell him she is under my protection. You tell him if he or any man with him rides within 5 miles of my fence, I will take him apart and feed him to the land one by one. You tell him to ask in Leadville what my name cost the last man who made a woman his story." A card slid from a hand and fell on the floor. It made a flat sound. The bartender's mouth opened and closed and did not find a thing to do. The girl at the piano looked at Jonah as if she had not seen a man before. The narrow man swallowed. He had a tongue that could not find his teeth. "I can tell him." "Do that." Jonah turned and stepped back into the bright. The sign flashed again when the light caught it. He did not look at it. He put his foot in the stirrup and swung up. The horse headed for the edge of town without being told. The dust rose behind them in a loose ribbon. The wind pushed at his coat and tried to get under it. He let it push and rode against it until the town was a handful of shapes, and then just the thought of shapes and the line of the windmill took up its rhythm again. Dusk put a copper edge on the hills. The windmill kept its slow complaint. Jonah rode into the yard and swung down. He set the iron catch, lifted the bar, and stepped inside. May stood by the table with the pistol under her palm. She had a rag in her other hand and a line of soap across her knuckles. He set the sacks down and looked at her. The look said what the words would only repeat. His voice was steady. "I told them. Your name, mine. The line they will not cross." She searched his face and let out a breath she had not noticed holding. It left her smaller and straighter. Her hand found the pistol again. "Show me," she said. The words had a shape that belonged in the room. "All right." He took the pistol from the mantel and set it on the table between them. It was a small .32 with a pearl grip kept clean only by neglect. He opened the cylinder and tapped out the empties. He turned one brass case in his fingers. Then he handed her the gun. 2 hands, elbows soft. Do not fight the kick. Let it do what it wants and bring it back to where you mean to aim. Sight on the front, not the hole. She nodded. "I am done running. Then I am done being late." Morning opened clear and cold. They stepped behind the stable where the rock bluff would catch lead. Jonah set a tin can on a flat stone. He placed the box of cartridges on a crate and slid the lid back. The smell of oil and old paper lifted. He showed her how to stand. Feet set one slightly forward weight, like a dancer who does not know she is one. He put his hand over hers to fix the grip. Fingers high, thumb lay along. Keep your wrists honest. She lifted the pistol. The front sight wobbled. She breathed. The shot cracked. The recoil jumped into her arms and up into her neck. The can did not move. Dust spat from the bluff. Her ears rang as if bees had come up out of the ground. "Again," Jonah said. His voice fit between the echoes without hurry. She set the sights front and rear, not quite a line. She squeezed. The shot went wide. The smell of powder sat on her tongue like a metal coin. She blinked against the sting in her eyes. He stepped in close enough to adjust without crowding. "Belly," he said. "Not the head. The head will make you lie to yourself. The belly is a body. Big. Slow. Keep pulling until there is nothing left to pull." She nodded and felt foolish for nodding, then let the feeling pass. She fired. Missed. Fired. Missed closer. The 4th shot spun the can 1/2 turn and set it back down, crooked. She startled a smile she did not mean to show. Jonah gave one short nod. "Good. Do it again." By noon, the pads under her fingers had gone tender. Cordite and dust had settled into the lines of her hands. The pistol's bite had climbed up her forearms and set a small ache in the bones. She looked at the can and saw it move again on the 5th string. She breathed into the ache and found a count that matched the trigger. They broke when the sun climbed over the roof. Jonah kept the pace quiet. He led her through the motions with no waste. Load with your fingers away from your eyes. Brass can cut. Check the mouths. Feel the weight when it is right. Do not trust a glance. trust the habit you build. Inside, they ate cornbread and stew from the night before. The spoon clinked against the bowl. Neither of them said words that did not sit on the table and do work. After Jonah brought in a stack of boards and a box of nails, he measured the window with a length of string and cut planks to cover the lower half. He left a slot 6 inches tall just above the tabletop. Light made a hard line through it. May stood on a chair and held the first board while he drove the nails. The hammer echoed and spooked a hen in the lean-to. The slit became clean and true. From the outside, the sack curtain hid the change. From the inside, the view turned narrow and useful. He tapped the last nail to seat it and ran his knuckles along the edge to feel for a snag. They moved the table to sit under the window so May could kneel and shoot through the slit. He slid the bureau sideways to brace the door. The wood of the floor told him where it liked to stop, and he listened and let it. He lifted the loose board by the hearth with the point of his knife. The nails squealed and came up. Underneath lay a space the size of a couple of loaves. He set 3 paper boxes of 32 and a handful of loose rounds wrapped in cloth. He placed a box of Winchester cartridges for himself. He set the board back and pressed the nail home with the heel of his hand. "We will count," he said. "You will keep the count in your head until your head cannot keep it. When that happens, your hands will keep it. That is why we place them here, and not only on the shelf where anyone can see." May crouched and lifted the board herself. She put it down. She lifted it again. The small squeal matched the one before. She closed it and smoothed the edge. The motion settled into her like a rung on a ladder. They carried in water from the tank and filled the big crock by the hearth. They set 2 buckets just inside the door, where a hand could find them in the dark. Jonah took a sack and filled it with sand, then set it by the slit so the pistol could rest on something that would not skip. At the stable, he checked the hasp and added a piece of iron so that it would hold from the inside as well as the out. The horse blew and turned his head to watch with a thoughtful brown eye. They brought in a forkful of hay and set a small barrel of water within reach. They came back to the yard with a coffee can full of bent nails and bits of glass. May scattered them into the dust along the porch edge where boots would rush without looking. She stood back and saw nothing. The dust took the sharp like a mother swallowing a lie. Her mouth thinned at the thought, then relaxed. She brushed her hands and went in. Afternoon, they cleaned the guns at the table. Oil smell, linen patches, the sound of metal kissed by cloth. Jonah showed her the slide of the rod through the barrel, and the one extra pass that catches what the others miss. He wiped the pearl grip with a corner of the clean rag and set it on the table. He handed her the pistol. "You load," he said, and took the lamp from its hook and lowered the flame. In the dim, May found the cartridges by touch, round to round, the rim and the notch, the click of the cylinder as it turns. Her ring brushed brass and made a small, bright sound. She closed the gun and set it down. He nodded. Again. He turned the wick lower until the room leaned toward dark. She did it again. She did not lose any of it to doubt. When the light was almost gone, he lifted the wick back up. The room returned to amber. He drank water and watched her count out 6 rounds and leave 2 on the cloth. "Why 2?" he asked. She thought and said what her hands knew. 1 for the knock, 1 for the drag, the rest for what will not listen. He did not correct her. He let the answer sit and harden into something that will not crumble. They ate salt pork with beans. He cut the pork small so the salt would spread. She added a pinch of sugar and the pot changed its face. They did not talk about men in town or nights or what the wind would bring. They spoke about whether the woodpile would last 2 days or 3. They spoke about the hinge he had fixed and how it still wanted a washer. They spoke about the feed sack curtain and how it let the light be something people could live with. When the dishes were stacked, May stood at the slit and looked out. The evening drew the yard into itself. The dust lay flat like a blanket. The windmill turned 1 arm, then 2, and paused as if thinking. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers found the edge of the slit and held. She set the pistol on the sandbag and eyed along the sights and drew the hammer and lowered it with care. The motion settled into her shoulders. Jonah checked the door bar and set a wedge under the bureau leg to take the wobble from the wood. He walked the room once the way a man walks the fence looking for holes in a thing that must not have holes. He found the lamp wick too high and turned it down. He touched the coffee tin to see if there was enough for morning. He put his hand on the kettle to feel warmth. He took his hand away. She turned from the window. Her face was calm and thin and unafraid. She could see that he was measuring her and not finding her wanting. She moved to the hearth and lifted the loose board and let it go and listened for the squeal. She did it once more, then looked up. "I know where everything is," she said. "Good." He set his rifle against the wall by the slit stock within reach. He took the pistol and handed it back to her. "Keep it on you, not on a shelf." She tucked it into the pocket of her dress and felt the anchor of it against her hip. Night settled. The wind went from a voice to a breath. The room held a pool of light, and the two of them inside it. Jonah poured one finger of coffee for each. They drank it without words. The taste was bitter and clean, and woke the last places that had gone dull. May drew a blanket and laid it by the hearth. She smoothed it with one palm. Jonah rolled his bed near the door, where he could stand in one motion if the door wanted to argue. He set his hat on the peg, and the badge stayed in the drawer, with the tin box where it belonged. The bar rested on its brackets with the weight of something that had done its work for a long time. May looked at her hand. The band caught the fire and sent it back in a thin line. She touched the gold with her thumb and felt metal warmed by skin. She lay down and watched the slit become a stripe, and then a darker stripe. She set her hand on her ribs and felt the rise and fall find an even march. Jonah lay on his side and listened to the house learn their breathing. He let his eyes trace the line of the boards, the scar in the table where a hot pan had once bitten the clean edge of the curtain. He folded one arm under his head and let the other rest on the floor where his fingers could touch the stock. He did not think of town. He did not count miles. He watched the lamp burn down in a curve that he knew by heart, and he let the quiet cover them both like a good coat. The house settled around them as if it had a spine. The bar rode steady in its brackets. The slit in the window held a strip of night. The lamp burned low and turned the room the color of amber tea. Wood ticked in the hearth. A moth tapped the glass and found nothing to hold. May stood by the table and set the pistol on the sandbag. Her fingers rested on the pearl and then lifted. She smoothed her dress at the hip where the weight had been. She breathed in and out until the breath came easy. Jonah watched from his place by the door with his hand near the rifle and his hat on the peg. He had the look of a man counting fences in his head. She moved to the line where the lamp's circle faded to shadow. She stopped there as if it were a doorstep. She spoke without raising her voice. "Not payment. My choice." Jonah did not move right away. His eyes searched her face as if there were words there he needed to read twice. He stepped from the door slow so she could see his feet. He stopped close enough to feel the warmth that lives between two bodies. He did not reach. "May I?" he said. May answered by taking his hand and setting it at her waist. The fabric of the dress was thin and clean. His palm warmed it at once. She lifted her other hand and found the line of his jaw. Stubble rasped her fingertips. He closed his eyes as if the feeling had weight. "Kiss me," she said. He bent his head. The first touch was careful a test against a surface that might break. The second was breath and salt, and the taste of coffee left from the last small pour. Her hand climbed to the back of his neck. His arms went around her without hurry, one across her shoulders, one at the small of her back. He did not pull. He waited for her to lean. She leaned. The room sharpened, then softened. She could hear the moth one more time, and then not at all. They moved together at a pace that made sense in this house. He set the pistol on the mantel out of reach of elbows. She set the lamp wick lower so the flame would not climb too high. They learned the floor with their feet. The cot gave a small noise when her knees touched it. He sat first and took her hands and drew her gently into his lap, then eased back until they lay side by side. The blanket rasped. The smell of clean linen rose up around them. There were places where her body went tight out of habit. He felt them and waited. He put his mouth to her temple where the thin scar lay. He did not avoid it. He honored it with a kiss that held no pity. Her breath fluttered and then steadied. She touched the place on his shoulder where the muscle rolled like a live thing under the skin. She felt his strength and also the restraint that lived inside it. He had built that restraint the way men build fence lines post by post, and it was strong enough to lean on. His hands were work hands, rough and sure. They did not take. They asked questions without words and stayed for answers. She answered and found that the answers came easy when no one hurried her. Heat rose slow. It was the kind of heat that makes a person want to close their eyes and trust a season to be kind. He paused and put his forehead to hers. "Say stop if you need," he said. "I will," she said. They moved again. The lamp turned them gold. Shadows swayed on the far wall. The wind pressed once at the bar and then left. When she pulled at his shirt, her hands trembled not with fear, but with the newness of choosing. He helped where she fumbled and did not make a sound of impatience. He was careful with every tie and every button. When she touched his chest, he let out a breath that shook him. She felt the quake through her palms and knew it for what it was: awe. When he entered her, she held his face between her hands and kept his eyes. He asked again with his body, and she gave the yes with hers. The old fear came for one heartbeat and broke against the patience he had laid down. She made a sound she had not made in years, the sound of release when a door that has stuck slides true. He followed that sound and found her again and again until they met in the same place. It was not frantic. It was not proud. It was the hard work of tenderness, and they did it well. After he eased to one side so his weight would not press on her too long, he pulled the blanket up and made a small tent to hold the heat. He kissed the curve of her shoulder. She turned into him and placed her palm over his chest. His heart ran fast, then found a slower count. She listened to it until her own matched. He brushed the hair back from her face. His thumb traced her cheek. In the dim, she saw he had tears at the corners of his eyes. He did not hide them. "Do not say it if it hurts you," he said. "I love you," she said. He made a sound like a man who has set a heavy thing down after miles. He buried his face in her hair, and one tear fell on her neck and ran into the blanket. His shoulders shook once. He spoke into her skin. "I did not think I would hear that name for me again." She took his hand and placed it over the ring on her finger. The gold held a little of their heat. "You put this back," she said. "That is where it started." He turned her hand and kissed the band. His lips were warm. It felt like the first honest blessing that piece of metal had ever had. He pressed his mouth there and closed his eyes. He whispered, "You are not a debt. You are not a story a man tells to make himself large. You are May." She breathed in soft, and the breath left her as a sound that was almost a laugh. It was gentle and shy and belonged to the room. He smiled, and she felt the curve against her skin. They settled. The lamp made a low circle. The cot creaked and then found a place where it would not talk. The house learned this new rhythm. The wind stepped away from the door. The moth had given up and gone to the dark. May drew the blanket up to her chin with one hand and kept the other on his chest. She fell towards sleep without fear. Jonah lay awake a little longer and watched the thin stripe of night through the slit and the way it changed with clouds. He listened to the cooling of the stove and the soft catch of her breath. When his eyes closed, they closed easy. The ring lay between their two hands, and the metal held the warmth the way metal does, slow to heat and slow to lose it. The cold woke first. It came in through the seams and settled in the knuckles. The house was a small island lit by a dying lamp and a red eye in the hearth. May lifted her head. The strip of night in the slit had thinned. The yard lay a colorless shape. She could hear Jonah's breath from the floor by the door. It was the sound of a man who had not let himself go all the way under. A sound came that did not belong. A dull thud from the stable. The horse snorted once and then made a sound that stopped in the middle. Wood thumped. Harness scraped. Then nothing. The kind of nothing that makes your teeth find each other. Jonah was on his knees in one motion. He had the rifle in his hands before the last echo lost its place. He looked at May and did not look at the door. "Back window," he said. "Two there, three front. That is how I would split them." May rolled to her feet and took the pistol from the pocket of her dress. The feel of the pearl in her palm steadied her. She moved to the table and slid into the crouch she had practiced. The sandbag took the weight of her wrists. The slit cut the yard into a small screen. The windmill blade moved once and stopped. A man's voice came from the dark, drawling sloppy too, pleased with the noise he could make. "May Whitlow, honey, your rightful man is here. Open up and spare yourself the smoke. Come on now." Her shoulders tightened. Jonah watched her face, not the slit. He spoke like a man counting to 10 so a child can do it with him. "You are not his story. Hold the gun steady. Belly." May breathed in and made a shape of that breath with her ribs. She let it out slow. The slit showed the edge of the porch and the pail of dust. A shadow crossed and leaned and crossed back. The pistol felt heavier than it had yesterday. She set the front sight in the dark, not on a head, but where a man keeps a gut. A whisper of leather came from behind the house. The quiet had a weight to it. Jonah crawled to the jamb and lined the Winchester with a narrow seam between planks that gave a view of the porch steps. He did not try for more than a glimpse of boot and thigh. Another voice younger said from the yard, "Can't see nothing." He laughed without humor. "Burn it. Smoke 'em." A hand slid into the back window on May's left. Fingers found the sill and gripped. A boot heel scraped. The frame shuddered. A face rose into the narrow. It was close enough that she could see the whites of his eyes turn as he tried to find the room. She stood, raised the pistol, and shot the place where the shirt hung loose over the belt. The gun popped and jumped in her hands. He made a surprised sound like someone who had stepped into a hole he had forgotten. She did not wait. She fired again into the same dark patch, then again. The fourth shot tore him backward. The fifth shot was for the weight that still wanted to come forward. He fell out of the square and the sill emptied. The front of the house blew splinters. The crack in the plank spat wood and dust. A shot that took a bite out of the door edge. Jonah fired through the seam without rising. A grunt answered. Feet shuffled. Someone said, "I'm hit. Jory." Another shot answered from the porch. The lamp chimney rang like a small bell and went dark. The room fell to ember light. May's ears rang. The taste of salt and metal was in her mouth. She snapped the cylinder. The hot brass kissed her fingers as she tapped them out. She reached for cartridges by feel and pushed them home. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Her ring brushed brass and made a bright click. She closed and set her stance again. A shape moved in the back square, lower this time. A man came in fast with a knife down low to keep it from catching light. He was inside before she had the gun fully up. She saw the mouth, the wet teeth, the hair stuck flat with sweat. He was close enough that she could see the point on the knife had been filed more than once. He raised it across his body. A rifle shot cracked from the doorway. The man's head stopped in the middle of a thought. He fell against the wall and slid down with a noise like meat on paper. Jonah worked the lever and took his place again without a word. The yard went quiet in a wrong way. 3 left came a whisper from outside. Maybe just the marshal. The rest ran. The voice wanted to be brave. 2, Jonah said softly. He fired through the seam. The sound in the yard changed like a man losing his feet on stairs. Another shape tried to cross and failed to become a shape. The Winchester spoke, and the wood under Jonah's cheek jumped with each report. The door shook with a heavy kick. The bureau slid an inch and found the wedge. Another kick sent a crack from the latch across the plank. May had one palm on the sandbag and one on the floor. She could feel the wood rattle through her bones. A laugh came from the porch, deep, almost cheerful. "He is mine," he said, and the voice was full of drink and a kind of happiness that only makes sense to men like him. "Move, boys." The door blew inward on the next kick. The bureau scraped, caught, and then toppled sideways and braced the frame by accident more than design. A big man filled the space left. He had a beard that had grown in fits and a coat with the kind of shine oil leaves. He carried a shotgun by both barrels like a club because the shells were spent and rage made him careless. He saw May. His eyes ran over the room like a dog over a bone. "Well now," he said, "look at you, playing wife, playing clean. Think a man like him wants your kind. You are storage. You've been storage your whole life." The words came and did not land. May stood. She brought the gun up. She did not aim for the mouth that spilled words. She set the front sight on the place below his belt. "I am not ruined," she said, and the words were simple and true. She fired. The pistol cracked. The bullet went in where she had placed it. Roy's eyes looked down as if the wound were a trick. His lips pulled back from his teeth. The shotgun fell from his hands and hit the floor, and the barrels rang. He took a step because bodies do what they were told before they learn a new command. He went to his knees. He put a hand to the wound and it came away dark. He looked up at her and tried a smile that had no place in his face. He tried to rise again because he thought that was what men did to save pride. Jonah stepped out of the seam and closed the distance. He brought the rifle up until the muzzle met the light at Roy's temple. Roy's eyes moved one more time and saw nothing that could help him. Jonah pulled the trigger. The sound filled the room and emptied it too. Roy went down like a bag of feed cut open at the top. Silence had a shape after that. It draped over the table and the cot and the stove and then settled on the floor. May could hear the little sound the lamp made when it cooled. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. Jonah turned. His shoulder hit the doorpost. His right hand let go of the rifle without meaning to. He put his left hand to his right shoulder and pressed. His fingers slid in something that was warm. Blood ran over the heel of his palm and down his arm. The wet soaked into his shirt and turned the fabric dark. He blinked and tried to breathe like he had been breathing, and found that he could not. May crossed the room fast enough to make the boards complain. The pistol went into her pocket without her thinking. She caught his elbow and then his waist. He was heavy, but he still moved with her. She got him to the table and then to the floor, where the light from the hearth had found a clean patch. "Let me see," she said. He grunted once and ground his teeth because he did not want to swear in that room. The wound sat high near the collarbone. Glass glittered around it where the window had spat itself earlier. Splinters rode his sleeve like porcupine quills. The meat had a folded look that skin gets when it has been pushed aside, Blood pumped because the heart does not check what the world is doing. "Whiskey," she said, and heard her voice as if it belonged to someone else. She fetched the bottle from the shelf. She shook it because her hands wanted to do something. She found the mending kit and the heavy needle and the coarse thread. "This will hurt," she said. "I am sorry." He found her face. He made his mouth flatten into a kind of smile. "Do it." She poured whiskey straight into the wound. He arched and bit at the air and gagged. His eyes went white at the edges and then found her again. She soaked a cloth and wiped glass as best she could. A sliver came with the cloth and made a small, hard sound on the floorboard. She threaded the needle with a piece of shirt torn into a cord. Her hands shook, so she set the needle down, pressed both palms flat to the floor until the trembling had somewhere to go, then picked it up again. She put the point to skin. She pushed. It went in with a kind of pop. He grunted, and his free hand found the leg of the table and held on. She drew the needle through and made the first clumsy knot. She made the second stitch inward and felt her hand find a rhythm. She made the third, the fourth. She breathed in time with the draws. She pulled thread and set knots and made a line where there had been none. Jonah sweat through the pain and through the coat of dust he had worn since town. He looked at the ceiling because the ceiling did not ask things from him. He let his eyes go soft and then brought them back into focus on May's face. He watched the part of her mouth that stayed calm and the part that tried not to be. He watched her hands steady without losing speed. He found a place inside himself where he could ride out a bucking thing and went there. May tied the last knot and packed the wound with a strip of clean linen that had once been a piece of her dress. She pressed until the welling slowed. Blood soaked into the strip and showed her a dark flower that would need changing. She wrapped the shoulder and pinned the cloth crooked because the pins did not want to go where she wanted them to go. She tugged and they obeyed. His breath came back in a ragged fit. He let his head drop to one side. She slid her hand under his neck to keep it from the floor. He pressed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the edges had gone gray. "Water," he said. She brought the cup she had set under the shelf. She tipped it to his mouth. He sipped, choked once, and sipped again. He took enough to wet the places that needed it and not more. He looked at the bodies on the floor. He looked at the mess that men make when they come through a door speaking one language. He looked back at May. His voice was a hoarse thread. "You all right?" She nodded. Her throat hurt. She could not say the word yes without it breaking. She put her hand on his wrist. His pulse beat under the skin like a small hammer. He closed his eyes and let the feel of her hand be the thing he paid attention to. It brought him a step back from the place he had been going. The house smelled like smoke and iron and whiskey. It also smelled like coffee gone cold and soap and fresh-cut wood. The wind moved around the outside and pushed a loose edge of curtain and made it breathe once, then settle. May stood and went to the door. She set the bar in the brackets again because the body needs to do the thing it knows how to do. She pushed until she felt the weight of it. She shoved the bureau back up on its feet and jammed a wedge under the leg. She picked up the shotgun and broke it at the hinge and checked the barrels, empty both. She set it beside the door and went back to Jonah. He was lighter when he slept, and he was asleep without having decided to be. She brought a blanket and laid it over him and then under his feet, because the cold comes in through the floor. She placed his hat on the peg because that was where it went. She picked up the lamp chimney and saw the crack from the bullet's kiss and set it back down so it would not cut her later. She took the bodies by the boots and dragged them one by one to the wall so the room would stop staring at her. The work was hard and ugly and necessary. She did not look at faces if she did not have to. When she could breathe without stepping over a leg, she went to the hearth and fed the coals. Flame took the kindling with a sound like paper sighed. She put the kettle on because hot water was the next smart thing. She washed the blood from her hands. It took a long time. It had gone into the lines and stayed there. The soap burned the cracked places and made them speak. She did not listen long. She went back to Jonah. She peeled the cloth from the wound to see how it was behaving. The edges of the stitches held. A little seep came through. She packed a fresh strip and pressed and counted until the red came slow. She brushed the hair from his forehead. He was warm, not hot. The skin under her fingers had the feel of a man who had been out in the weather and come in. His eyes opened halfway. He tried a smile because he knew his mouth could. It came and went. He spoke under his breath. "You did fine. You are not allowed to leave me," she said. Her voice was firm without being loud. "I still need you to show me where you keep the needles that are not for skin." He made a small sound that wanted to be a laugh. It pulled at the stitches and made him pay for the laugh. He let the sound die. He reached for her hand and she gave it. Their fingers fit the way tools fit their place when they have been used often. She sat on the floor. She braced his shoulders with her knees and cradled his head in the lap of her skirt. The firelight turned his face a warm color. The ring on her finger shone and went dull as the flame moved. She put her other hand on his chest and felt his breath. It found a rhythm that matched the wind on the wall. The room was still. Outside there were no more voices, no more feet. The horse in the stable did not speak. The windmill turned one slow blade and then waited. The bar on the door held its weight. The slit showed a piece of sky that was beginning to give up its night. The world looked like a thing that had decided to keep standing. May watched the line of stitches rise and fall. She fixed the blanket at his shoulder and laid her cheek against the back of her hand. She did not think of morning as a promise. She thought of it as a fact. She breathed in the smell of smoke and wool and the last of the whiskey. The house leaned around them in a way that felt like a body finding balance after a long sway. Jonah slept because the body makes its own mercy. May did not. She sat with him and kept count of the breaths. She spoke his name in her head when the count tried to wander. She listened to the kettle begin to sing. She listened to the small sounds wood makes when it gives up heat slow. She watched the strip of sky at the slit go, from coal to iron to a pale metal that wanted to be light. She put her hand over the ring and felt warm metal under her palm, not because of what it had been, but because skin had given it heat, and the metal had learned to hold it. Light came thin and cold over the bluff. The room had the smell of gun oil smoke and iron. May watched the rise under Jonah's bandage, in, out, not even but steady enough to believe. She eased his head to the folded shirt and stood. The bodies had to go. There is a kind of work the mind refuses until the hands begin it. She took each man by the boots and dragged him to the door. Boards bumped, knuckles scraped. Out across the porch down into the yard where dust swallowed tracks. She left them by the rock rise beyond the fence. Carrion birds hung in the high air like tiny crosses. They drifted and waited and did not judge. The big one lay last. Roy Cutter was heavy as grain. She did not look at his face. She thought of a shovel and knew there was no shovel with that kind of courage and no ground that would take him. She looped a rope to his ankles and pulled until her breath went hot and wild. When she let go, the rope burned her palms and left thin lines that whitened when she washed later. The stable was quiet. The horse lay on one side with a dark bloom under him where life had gone. She set a hand on the neck out of respect. The hide was still warm. She stood there and let grief be what it was. Then she closed the door and dropped the iron hasp. The windmill turned. Water plinked into the tank with small, clear sounds that belonged to another life. Inside, she scrubbed the floor. The blood lifted, then stained again, then lifted more. She changed the water twice. Soap ate her hands. She wiped the bullet dust from the shelf where the kettle lived and set the kettle back in its circle. She found the lamp chimney and washed the crack clean so it would not shed grit into the flame. Jonah woke and fell and woke again. Fever came like a visitor who did not knock. It set a heat in him that made him argue with air. May sat at his side with a cup and a rag. She kept the stitches clean. She dripped water into his mouth when it went dry. When he thrashed, she set her palm to his chest and pressed just enough to say, "Be here." He stilled for the count of 3 and then fought the ache again. She said his name so he would know where he had left it. She kept saying it until her voice went rough and thin. By the second day, the cabin stank of blood and whiskey. She opened the slit for an hour and let the light in. The wind slid a little fresh through the room and took some of the old away. She closed it and set the bar. She cleaned the guns again. She laid the .32 out and picked powder from the seams with a stitch needle. She oiled the hinge of the Winchester that had saved her ribs and his life. She set both back within reach, where hands know to go in the dark. On the third day, the fever broke like a wet branch. Jonah slept in a heavy way that looked like surrender. May slept then too, head on the mattress, hands still on the edge of the bandage, the way a person sleeps on a train station bench and does not dream. Morning gave him back, eyes open, not clouded. His voice was dry and tried to joke. "Your stitching feels like barbed wire." She laughed and cried in the same breath and hated the tears for getting on his face. He caught one with a thumb and pushed it away. He looked past her to the door. The bureau stood like a soldier. The bar sat straight in its brackets. His hand twitched for the hat that was not on his head. "The horse," he said. "Gone," she said. Her mouth made the word and let it sit. He closed his eyes. He nodded once. "Not your fault." By the end of a week, he could sit in the chair. He wore the blanket like an old chief and scowled at the way his arm hung careful at his side. May fixed the door with boards scavenged from the lean-to. She patched the hole near the latch with a piece of tin she found behind the stable. She hung a blanket over the slit where glass had failed and tied it with string so it could lift for a view. She carried the last of the bodies farther out so the smell would not come back. She washed the dress she had ruined and saw it would never be what it had been. She burned it behind the rocks and stood there until the flame died and the smoke did not sting anymore. When Jonah could stand without seeing black, he saddled the small Mustang that had wandered the wash and taken a rope as if it had been waiting to be useful. He strapped the rifle on his good side and swung up with a grimace that he tried to call a smile. "I will bring glass," he said. "Coffee, flour, one more thing." May stood with a hand on the door bar. She did not ask for a promise. She set the bar in its seat after he left because that is what keeps a house upright. She took the pistol and set it in her apron pocket and looked out through the slit while she waited. The windmill turned and held. The town had heard already. The drifter had talked. Men on the mercantile porch had lifted their hats with the kind of look men give to a man who did a thing they wish they had done. Women at the pump held their mouths small. A word like Jezebel rolled like a pebble in a pan. Mr. Klein nodded once from his stool and did not say anything. Mr. Pender set the pane of glass on the counter himself and wrapped it in newspaper as if he were wrapping a child. Jonah bought 2 fat chickens already bled. He bought coffee and salt and flour. He lifted a small leather book from a shelf that had held it too long. The paper inside was clean. He paid for all of it with quiet coins and a single bill that had known his pocket since before the storm. On the way out, a woman in a clean apron stepped aside as if he carried dirt in a bucket. The blacksmith lifted a brow and said nothing. Jonah let the door swing shut and did not look back. When he rode in, May was already at the hinge to let the bar loose. She helped him carry the pane with both hands, careful not to twist. They set it on the table. He waited while she pried the broken glass from the frame with the tip of his knife and a steady jaw. She eased the new piece into the wood. It fit, as if the frame had been cut for today. He tapped in the tacks. The clear square held the world in a way the feed sack never could. He set the chickens on the counter in the lean-to and left May to clean them. He placed the coffee in the tin, folded the bag just so, and slid it into the shelf. Then he took the small leather book and put it in front of her with a stub pencil. "For your thoughts," he said. He did not look at her while he said it. He looked at the wall, as if reading there. She touched the cover. It was smooth and warm from his hand. She opened the first page. The white stole her breath. She closed it and nodded and could not say thank you in a way that would carry the right amount of weight, so she did not say it yet. Toward afternoon, a wagon creaked up the rise. Jonah stepped to the door and took the rifle without thinking. A man stood in the box seat and lifted both hands. He had a beard like a riverbed and a hat too big for his head. "Peace," he called. "Brother Eli Monroe, I have water and verses if either is wanted. Heard there was trouble and came as slow as a man should. Thirsty if you can spare a dipper." "Water is there," Jonah said. He did not lower the rifle until he knew the horse's eyes and the shape of the stranger's boots. The preacher drank and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. He looked at the patched door and the new glass. He looked at May and the ring on her hand. He looked at Jonah and the way Jonah held himself like a hinge. "I can make it proper," Brother Eli said. He kept his voice gentle the way men do around wild things. "Right here, right now, if it is wanted." May stood still for a long beat. Then she undid the ring and put it in Jonah's left palm. He held it open and stared at the metal that had lived 2 lives already. She said, "You already married me when you bought this back. If you will have me, I will take your name." Jonah looked up fast and then down slow. He nodded. His throat worked once. "All right." They stood in the strip of grass behind the house where the windmill's shadow moved like a clock hand. The preacher opened a small Bible that had the look of an old friend. He spoke the words that have been said more times than storms have come through these parts. There was no dress that pretended it snow. There was no music but wind and the clack of the mill. May's hair was clean and shone. Jonah had shaved and a nick on his jaw had turned the color of a small rose. When Brother Eli said ring, Jonah held the band and did not blink. The preacher hesitated over the metal as if its history made it dangerous. Jonah shook his head. "It is her past and her future. It is what it cost and what it means." He took May's hand. His left hand was steady. He slid the ring home. He looked at her and spoke to her, not to the sky. "I marry you with my name, with my life." May's mouth curved. "I marry you with all I have left, with what I choose." Brother Eli smiled like a man who has seen water where others said there was none. He closed the book. He said the last words. He stepped back and put his hand on the horse to give the two people space that did not need much space. Jonah framed May's face with both hands and kissed her. Not show, not rush, a seal. When they stepped apart, the world looked clear through the new glass. The house held the smell of coffee and clean wood. The wind turned the mill, and it sang its small old song. The bar sat easy in its brackets. The ring flashed once in the late light, and then settled to a warm glow that the skin would keep until night. Winter put its hand on the land. Frost wrote lace along the new pane and melted when the kettle began to sing. May woke first most mornings. She took the fire from sleep to flame set the coffee and opened the small leather book. The pencil made a soft rasp. A line here, a list there. I was sold for 2 mules, she wrote once, and then crossed it out and began again. Today I mended his work shirt, and it held. Jonah learned the house in smaller circles. He practiced the slow reach that did not tug at the stitches until there were no stitches left. He chopped wood with his left shoulder turned and his right guarded by a tight bandage, and the sound of the axe finding the grain came true. When the cold gathered on the sill, he stood with his palm flat on the door and listened to the wind. He fixed what loosened. The bar moved smooth under his hand. The rifle stayed in its place and grew a thin coat of oil that held a smell like clean iron. They set 2 hens in the lean-to. The hens treated the place like old rooms they had rented before. Eggs came small and perfect. May held one to her ear as if an egg might have a story. When she cracked it into the skillet, the yolk broke like a small sun and held the morning in the pan. On a market day 2 weeks after the wedding, Jonah brought home a bundle that mewed and shook. He set it down and pretended to check the latch while May untied the string and lifted out a gray scrap with eyes too big for its face. It latched to the beat of her heart, like it had been looking for that sound in the dust for a long time. She set it on the table. It climbed into the coffee tin tipped and vanished in a soft clatter. Jonah lifted the tin, and the kitten glared at him from the bottom, as if he had told a joke that was not funny. They named him Beans because he kept trying to sleep where the beans lived. Days found their shape. Wind drew steady lines across the yard. May hung the wash and the shirts cracked when she took them down. She boiled bones for stock, and the house took on a warmth that had no smoke in it. She cut old feed sacks into strips and braided a rug. The braid made a circle that sat in front of the hearth and taught the floor a new softness. When Jonah's shoulder could take the pull, he rode the Mustang along the fence line and came back with his face cut by cold. He told the windmill what he had seen. Loose wire south, tracks from coyotes near the wash. He spoke to the horse in a low tone that kept the animal's ears turned to him. The Mustang blinked and breathed and flicked flies no one could see. Spring came in a single night of rain that hit the roof like a hand drumming a table. In the morning, the air held wet the way a room holds music after the player has stopped. The wash ran brown and fast. May found a patch of loam tucked against the rock. She pushed her fingers into it. It let her in. She carried buckets and filled the ground in squares. Onions, beans, collards if they could live. She knelt. She pressed seeds in with the same tenderness she used when she untangled thread. She talked to the dirt under her breath because talking had helped other small lives in this house. Jonah set fence over the garden, not to keep out neighbors, but to keep out hunger with 4 legs. He drove posts with a rhythm that called the wind. He strung wire. He watched May's hands flick soil as if the ground needed a little blessing for each seed. They ate outside the first warm evening. A split log served as a bench. The world held the taste of onion fresh from the green and eggs that had known morning. Jonah cut the cornbread with his pocket knife. Beans stalked a moth in the grass and forgot it 2 feet later. The windmill turned slow. Water tapped the tank and kept its count in case anyone forgot. The house changed by inches. May found a crate in the lean to scrape the splinters down with Jonah's knife, rubbed it with a rag that once had soap in it, and set it on the wall as a shelf for tin plates. She tugged the feed sack curtain down and washed it in the tub, and hung it back so it smelled like wind and sun. She stitched 2 old chemises into a proper curtain for the window by the table. When she drew it aside, the glass was a square of clean world. She stood with her fingers on the edge of the cloth and felt the idea of a threshold in that small act. Shade or light, in or out, hers to choose. Jonah took the badge from the tin box one evening and looked at it a long time. He did not put it on. He wiped it with a corner of the rag and set it back with care. He hung the Winchester on 2 pegs, not high like a trophy, not hidden like a sin. The gun belonged to the house the way the bucket did, and the broom, tools that did what they had to when the world forgot itself. Summer laid the dust down and then lifted it again. The garden kept color anyway. Vines ran where there had been nothing. May laughed once at the sight of a bean hook curling around a string. The sound surprised her, and Jonah looked up quick and then let the look go quiet, like a man puts a candle under a palm to keep the wind off. They went to town together once with eggs and a sack of beans. Some faces tilted away, some nodded with a respect that chose not to be loud. Mr. Pender put a copy of a thin paper under the coffee tin and did not charge for it. Mr. Klein adjusted May's found pocket watch without taking a coin. The blacksmith said the shoulder looked decent for the work it had done, and Jonah said it had met a good seamstress. The girl from the copper lantern passed on the far side of the street and lifted a hand low where no one could see. May lifted hers, and the gesture held the exact weight it needed, and no more. By fall, nights cooled, and pumpkins showed their quiet orange under the leaves. The wind that had once spoken in one long hurt had learned a softer voice. It tapped the bar now and then to say it was there, and then left the door be. The hens grew fat. The Mustang learned the sound of the grain scoop and came at a trot. In the evenings they played at telling their day like two people do when they have learned each other's words. He spoke little, and she filled the spaces with weather, and the look of the hawk over the wash, and how Beans had decided the lamp flame was a creature and tried to paw it. Jonah pointed at a hinge that had stopped complaining since she found a washer the size of a pea in the dirt. He said, "You fixed the thing I could not see." She smiled without showing teeth and said, "You fixed the part that needed a hammer." Sometimes May took the leather book and sat by the window when the light was clean. She wrote small. "Today I planted onions and they kept. Today the wind was kind and it mattered. Today I cleaned the ring with soap, and the shine it gave back was mine." Scar tissue drew a rope across Jonah's shoulder. Some days it pulled. He did not say much when it did. May saw it in the way he set his jaw. She set her hand there, and the rope loosened a notch because hands can teach old pain the shape of a better lesson. He kissed the inside of her wrist like a man tasting a thing that had once been rare. They learned to sleep with the window cracked when the night allowed. The house breathed. The room held cool against skin. The lamp went out and left the world to its own stars. The windmill turned the kind of slow that means nothing is urgent. Morning again. Years had folded themselves into a clean stack. The stable stood true. A young buckskin flicked his ears in the new stall and looked out like he had always belonged to this fence. The garden wore a fence and green that made squares on the ground. Steam lifted from 2 cups on the sill. May stood in the open doorway with her hands around a mug. Jonah came up behind her and fit his arm around her waist with the instinct of a man who has learned the measure of his home. His right hand rested on her fingers. The scar under the shirt had gone to a pale rope. Beans leaped to the sill and stared like a judge at whatever moved in the grass. The sun climbed. It made a thin gold line along the edge of the new glass and then poured into the room. May tipped her face to it the way a plant does. Jonah took her hand in his and turned it. He did not kiss her mouth. He bent and kissed the ring. The metal was warm. It had learned their heat a long time ago and kept it well. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.